For most people who just have a passing familiarity with the character, the history of Superman in the movies really starts with Richard Donner's Superman. Superman the movie. And isn't that quaint that they called it Superman the movie? Like if they didn't put that colon in there with the movie after Superman, somehow audiences would think that they were just going to show slides of comic books for 2 hours. No, no, no. It's a movie. It's Superman the movie. When you go to your local theater, you'll be seeing a proper movie. And with good reason is this considered to be a major turning point, or perhaps like a starting over point for the character, because leading up to Superman the movie, even though Superman was certainly still a part of the popular culture in the 60s and the 70s, Superman was not really seen as an A-list attraction. One of the things they did to make Superman feel like it was important, like it was big, like it was worth spending millions and millions of dollars to make a major motion picture out of, was treating the material with sincerity. Not necessarily with seriousness, because if you watch Donner's Superman, it is not overly serious. There is still a very lighthearted, very sort of jokey quality to it, but it's not self-conscious, and it's not ironic, and it's not satirical, and it's not cynical. What Donner realized was you had to treat it sincerely to get people to care about what was going on. You couldn't be constantly winking at it and reminding people and pointing out how stupid it was if you wanted them to have an emotional investment in the movie. And that's what Donner wanted more than anything else, was to give people a movie where they could really have an emotional investment in Superman. Perhaps no factor in the film is more important to allowing audiences to relate to Superman as a character, as a person, than the casting of Superman. And with the casting of that role, Donner and his casting director and his writer, producer, they all decided that they were going to cast an unknown, someone who was not a familiar face to general audiences. And they cast probably the most perfectly suited actor to a signature role ever in the history of popular cinema, and that would be Christopher Reeve as Superman and Clark Kent. If there has ever been an actor more perfectly suited to play a role like Superman, a big, iconic, franchise-anchoring role, I have not seen. I mean, there have been others who have done great jobs playing superhero characters. I thought Tobey Maguire was splendid as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I thought Christian Bale did a really amazing job as Batman in his 3 films. But Christopher Reeve is really the one who set that template and really set the bar that those other actors must aspire to. He was just absolutely perfectly suited as Superman, and as Donner's Superman, as the Superman who was able to be an incredibly nice, honest guy without seeming like a goody-goody, without seeming like a Boy Scout, a goody two-shoes, because that's always been the knock on Superman, that he's too good, that he's too moral. But Christopher Reeve gave us a Superman that was as morally upright and as wonderful of a role model as any parent could ever ask for their children, and yet was also an incredibly emotionally involving and incredibly compelling character. And again, it goes back to that sincerity. Reeve played Superman with incredible sincerity. You really felt like he was just completely open when he was on screen, completely unself-conscious in that silly costume, so much so that you don't even really think about it when you're watching him. When you watch Superman the movie, you are seeing a 6'4", 30-year-old man at the time dressed in this absurd costume. I mean, there's no reason to take anyone wearing that costume seriously at all. That should break your disbelief right there. As soon as you see him walk out in that stupid costume, that should shatter your suspension of disbelief completely. And it doesn't. Reeve is so good in that character that it doesn't break your suspension of disbelief one bit. At least it doesn't for me. He meets the 2 other characters in the story that are almost as important as he is, and those characters are Lois Lane and later Lex Luthor, and neither of whom share his his naive, sort of upright, upbeat, open-hearted view of the world. Both Lois and Lex, in different ways, but very much so, are extremely cynical about life. Lois is the reporter. She doesn't naturally trust people. She looks at Clark as kind of a rube, as kind of someone to be pitied. I mean, she likes him. She clearly likes him at first, but she doesn't really get him. And she kind of feels sorry for him, and kind of seems to wonder, like, what is he doing here? And Lex Luthor, of course, sees Superman as someone to be taken advantage of. He reads the story about Superman in the newspaper, and he immediately sees this person who is so good and so noble and so honest that he just sees all of these ways that he can take him down, that he can defeat him. Margot Kidder playing Lois Lane, probably, I wouldn't even say probably, easily the best Lois Lane of all the Lois Lanes. I spoke very highly of Phyllis Coates in my review of Superman and the Mole Men, and she also played Lois in the first season of Adventures of Superman on TV, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful Lois Lane. But Margot Kidder matches and exceeds her, I think, in this movie particularly. I just think she's an incredible Lois. A really great take on the character, the way she is incredibly mean and cynical and hard-bitten to everybody except Superman. With Superman, she's like a girl in love, you know, she's just absolutely putty in his hands. But to everybody else, she's the chain-smoking, wisecracking Lois Lane. And Margot Kidder, at this point in her career, on a completely superficial level, I found incredibly beautiful and attractive. So there's that too. Just a great, everything you could ever want from a Lois Lane. And Gene Hackman playing Lex Luthor. Hackman, along with Marlon Brando as Jor-El, were sort of the star power in the film, and everybody else was filled in with reliable journeyman players or newcomers like Christopher Reeve. And Hackman as Lex Luthor is just phenomenal. He really lends... That's really where the light, sort of comical tone comes into the movie. As I said, this is not necessarily a serious movie, although it is a very sincere movie when it comes to Superman. And Hackman's Lex is sort of the classic wisecracking comic relief villain. His evil scheme is very big and cartoonish. It's basically a land scheme. He wants to blow up half of California and sink it into the sea so that the cheap land he purchased in the desert will suddenly become incredibly valuable beachfront property that he can sell to people and make a fortune. It's this insane, grandiose scheme that makes no sense at all, because in order for it to succeed, he has to trigger an earthquake with nuclear bombs. It's totally nuts. It's totally nuts. But it fits the tone of this movie, and it fits the version of Lex that we are given by Gene Hackman. And even with his more cartoonish, light version of Lex, there are moments of seriousness and moments of gravity. My favorite moment, one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, is when he and Superman are talking in his underground lair, and he is describing his plan, how he's going to trigger an explosion on the San Andreas Fault, and California will fall into the sea, and all those millions of people will die. And Superman says, is this how a diseased mind like yours gets its kicks, by planning the deaths of innocent people? And utterly cold, with a kind of calm steeliness that we have not seen from him at all in the film to this point, Lex says no by causing the deaths of innocent people. And it's just a wonderful moment from Gene Hackman as Lex, and it's a glimpse of that steel, of that cold-bloodedness that is beneath the sort of buffoonish surface. So we've got that, and a thread that we might not even have remembered or picked up on until this point. There's also the bringing to the forefront of the conflict within Superman, which is really what the movie winds up being about. At the end, the big choice that Superman has to make is the choice of whether he is going to be a human or whether he is going to be a Kryptonian. Is he going to be Clark, in a sense, or is he going to be Kal-El? And that choice manifests itself in the form of, and spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen this, almost 40-year-old movie, Lois is killed in the breaking up of the San Andreas Fault. Lex launches his missiles. Superman doesn't get there in time to stop the missile exploding in California, and there's a major earthquake and a landslide and a flood and all this horrible stuff happens. And in all of the rush to save people and stop the disasters, Lois is killed. And Superman finds her after she's dead. He pulls her car out of this crevice that she's fallen into and been buried alive. And he's just distraught, overwhelmed, devastated. And he takes matters into his own hands. And he flies into the sky. And he's confronted by these images of his two fathers, the voices and the images of Jor-El, his father from Krypton, and of Pa Kent from Smallville, the father that raised him. And he has this choice to make, because his Kryptonian father has told him through the recordings that he has learned from in the Fortress of Solitude and in the ship that he was brought to Earth in. He has told him what the rules are for living on Earth as a Kryptonian. He's told him that, look, you can set an example for them. You can try to be a role model and stir them to positive action. You can use your powers to help people. You can use your powers to fight evil, but you can't use your powers to alter the destiny of the planet to your liking. And then on the other side, you have Pa Kent, who has a much more simplistic view of things, who knows nothing of his son's actual history, just knows of what he can do, of his incredible abilities. And you hear Pa Kent's voice echoing from the past, telling him, son, I know that you're put here for a reason. Telling him that you're supposed to use your powers to change things. That's what you're here to do. I don't know why, I don't know how, I just feel it in my heart that that's what you're here for, to make a difference. And he has these two choices. And it's not just a choice between what are you going to do about Lois, it's also a choice of what are you going to be. You have the father who raised you as a human, and you have the father who is speaking from the long distant past, telling you you're not a human, you're a Kryptonian, and these are the rules you have to live by. And ultimately he chooses to listen to his human father. Superman chooses to be a human, not to be a Kryptonian. He goes with his heart, and he goes with the world and the people and the culture that he has grown up in and that he has thought of as his own. And that's the choice he makes. And it means breaking this incredibly important rule that his Kryptonian father has laid out for him, that he is not supposed to use his powers to play God. He's not supposed to use his powers to alter the destiny of the planet. And he does it. He goes back in time, or turns time backward, depending on how you interpret the scene. He flies around the world in that famous shot where you see him leaving contrails behind him as he circles the globe incredibly quickly, and the rotation of the Earth slows and stops and then starts rotating the other way, and we see events reversing themselves. They run the film backwards, as it were. And you can either interpret that as he is literally causing time to move backwards, or you can look at that a little bit more plausibly, although this is a Superman movie and lots of incredibly implausible things happen, as just a visualization of Superman himself traveling back in time. Either way, what happens is he goes back in time and he is able this time to prevent the event that kills Lois. That's the big choice that Superman has to make, the big character-defining choice that really completes his arc in this film and makes him who he is. That's when he decides, I'm not just someone who lives here, I'm not just someone who's pretending to be one of these people, I am one of these people. Even if I'm pretending to be Clark and I'm really Superman, Superman is one of these people. It was a great success financially. It was a hugely influential film. If not for Superman the movie, there's certainly, even though it was 11 years later when Tim Burton's Batman came around, there certainly would not have been a Tim Burton's Batman. There certainly would not have been a major studio release of a Batman movie if not for the success of Superman. Superman the movie is really the starting point of the whole superhero genre in movies as a major A-list genre, as something that is not just sort of tossed off as a quickie to air in the spring or the winter, but is like a major attraction. Superman the movie is what started that, and is what proved that that genre of filmmaking could not only result in quality movies, but could result in movies that people would line up to see. It's a very important film in the history, the recent history of American popular cinema. And of course, it's a huge turning point in the history of the character of Superman. It really defined what that character was for an entire generation of people, and continues to do so today. Its echoes are still felt.